If she'd have kept on going down that way, she'd have gone straight to that castle. Welcome to You Guys Podcast. I'm Rob, this is Liam, and this week we watched Labyrinth. Aside from Coraline, this undoubtedly has to be one of the creepiest films ever made. Creepiest kids' films ever made, I'll add. Let's break this story down, shall we? Sarah, an annoying 15, maybe 16-year-old girl, wishes the goblins would take her brother away. So wish granted. That's exactly what happens. The Goblin King is Jareth. He is 300 years old and wishes to make Sarah his bride. He goes about this by spying on her, entering her house uninvited, drugging her, and threatening her brother. But it's okay, as he promises to be a slave if she only loves him, fears him, and does exactly as he says. It's nice to see that the old traditions of courtship haven't been lost. I mean, the sexual subtext in this film is creepier than a drunk uncle on a camping trip. But I digress. We are then led into the labyrinth, where Sarah has 13 hours to find Toby, or he becomes a goblin forever. So the question is, how many Sarahs have there been? Have they never defeated the labyrinth? Have they all chosen not to love, fear, and obey Jareth, and instead just let their siblings become goblins? This film has brought in an impressive 34 million at the box office, but the only number higher I would imagine is poor Toby's therapist bills. No way that kid led a happy, normal life after being subjected to that nightmare fuel. Oh, and in all of this rant, I have yet to mention David Bowie's codpiece. That codpiece is like a bloody beacon.
It certainly is. I mean, after all that, I'm still most surprised you didn't go with the David Bowie impression at the start, Rob. I mean, every line he delivers is absolute gold in this film. I
could barely do the impression I did. You want me to try and do David Bowie?
The problem is my David Bowie impression is based almost exclusively on, like, Flight of the Conchords now.
Okay.
Do you smoke grass up in space, Bowie, or AstroTurf? I bet you do, you freaky old bastard, you. It's like, that's what... And if I go too long, I end up sounding like, I don't know, like an old man. It's ridiculous. But it's an odd film. You really have laid out the film's myriad issues, of which, you know, if you are aiming to be critical of this film, it is easy to pick apart, especially the whole stuff with Jareth and Sarah, because I was watching it and I couldn't remember if it was supposed to be like a romantic relationship between the two. I was like, the problem with this film is, like, I don't know what Jareth's intentions are. No, like, does he want the baby, or is he just kind of kidnap the baby to get to Sarah because he wants to marry Sarah? Because it's never made clear. And I think the reason it's not made clear is because that probably is the reason. But they're like, dude, he's 39 and she's 16. Even in 1986, this is kind of weird.
It's really funny, isn't it? Because, yeah, he was 38, 39 when he filmed this, which is younger than we are now, which makes me sick. But, oh my God, that dude looks 70. Even when he was younger, that dude looks 70.
Well, I guess the more important thing is the one thing he doesn't look like is a goblin. So, again, it's like, I think in an earlier draft of the film, which supposedly made more sense, was that he wanted to get with Sarah to stop himself from turning into a goblin. So if he didn't get with Sarah, basically he turned into a goblin, which would have made his intentions clearer. Whereas in this, like you said, that whole line about, you know, make me a slave make me your prince and I will be your slave and all that nonsense, whatever it was. I wasn't sure if it was poetic or utter cobblers. I think it might have been the latter. But even at that point, I'm like, so wait, are you trying to make her your bride? And I think it's basically all been abandoned because this film isn't particularly short. I think it's like an hour and 40, which by 1986 standards for a family film is actually quite long. Most are 90 minutes on the nose.
Let's move along.
But I think it's because the main reason is there's no time for any narrative, any characterization, because this film is just a creature vehicle. It's just Jim Henson's been allowed to go insane. And the one thing I'll say, for all its faults, it's so goddamn imaginative. I cannot believe how many individual characters there are in this film and how many of them are memorable. How many stick with you, you know?
This film was made in 1986, like Cobra was last week. So I'm guessing whatever cocaine was left from Cobra last week, they used to film this film. Because
it feels more like an acid trip than a cocaine trip.
Okay, I'm not too sure, mate. Like, I mean, we'll get into, as you said, it's a creature feature, isn't it? It's just, you got those weird fire dancing headless bird things. You got Poggle with his massive head. You got basically the Alice in Wonderland caterpillar worm thing that is just leading you down the wrong path. It's absolutely insane. You said about Jareth maybe becoming a goblin in the other script.
Yeah. Well, this
I wonder if he started
this film famously had like a whole bunch of different treatments, a whole bunch of rewrites, but that was one of them at least.
If that was true then, and he was starting to become a goblin penis first, because my God, that was poking out. Do you know what I imagine that? Do you remember, obviously you remember Total Recall? That might be his Quattro.
Oh, yeah.
Or his Quattro, or whatever it was called.
His Quattro, it's just on his... Like, if he had pulled his pants down, it would have been like a little dude with arms. Open your mind, Quaid. Open your mind. Maybe the thing is, it's such a big decision. Like, I get... Right, all I can think is, right, they've gone into costume. My theory is the codpiece hasn't come first. The codpiece has come last. And he's put on the outfit, and they're like, dude, we can see your dick. Like, you know, you can see the pants. And you're like, I honestly think if you remove the codpiece, you're just getting an outline of his junk. And they're like, we're going to have to do something about it. And they've just gone to, like, I don't know, a fucking cricket store and just bought a giant codpiece. But of course, then it becomes so distracting. Like, and the thing is, for something to be distracting in this film is almost a miracle. Like Jareth himself, David Bowie is Jareth, with the hair, the makeup, like you said, the fact that he looks anywhere between 30 and 70. He's a bizarre creature, David Bowie, in the best possible way. You got all this shit going on, and all you can look at is his crotch.
I love, right, how you're saying he went into wardrobe and did that. No fucking way. There is no way in hell he did not walk in off the street dressed like that.
You think he insisted on it?
Yeah, this is how Jareth is looking, and this is like he walked in.
Jim, I insist on the codpiece.
Yeah, like literally, he walked in with his wardrobe already set. There's no.
I like the idea that he walked in with literally nothing else other than the codpiece. He's just wearing his normal clothes, and let's be clear, his normal clothes aren't particularly normal. And he's just putting down, like, the codpiece is coming with me. That's coming into the film.
I mean, let's move a bit north from the codpiece and talk.
Well, we have to eventually.
And talk about that hair.
Well, it's magnificently 80s.
It is fantastic, isn't it?
Well, there's a lot of 80s stuff going on, and we were warned by one of our listeners not to be critical of this film. I feel like they're already going to be very upset because we have been very critical. But I did warn him if there was something I was going to be critical of, it's Sarah's wardrobe. Because, I mean, don't get me wrong, I was absolutely in love with Sarah when I was growing up. Like, she was one of my early crushes, you know, Jennifer Connelly. Like, you know, obviously it seems weird now because she's 60, unless, of course, she's 39-year-old David Bowie, but growing up, a massive crush. But it wasn't Sarah in her normal garb, because I think it's hard to have a crush on anybody wearing a waistcoat that fucking terrible. And even my wife went after her shoes. She's like, dude, what's up with those fucking shoes?
Don't say you fell in love with Sarah when she was dressed up in that weird flowing gown at the beginning.
100% when she was dressed as like the princess in that weird red shoes / eyes wide shut dream sequence in a dream. Like, it's really... kind of reminded me of, you know, like the nightmare sequence from Batman versus Superman, where it's like a dream in a dream. Like, are they fucking doing this? It makes more sense in Labyrinth, admittedly.
Oh, sorry.
But,
okay.
when I was like growing up and I was like 13, 14 years old, and her with, again, speaking of hair, where did all that fucking hair come from? And the dress with the shoulder pads and stuff. Oh my God. She was like the quintessential princess.
I thought you were going to say the one right at the beginning of the film, the beginning credit.
Oh, no.
With that weird white dress on over her jeans in the middle of a park.
Yeah, well, she's a bit of a weird character. No, it definitely wasn't that one. It was definitely the dream sequence with the hair and the glitter and stuff. But no, at the start, I'm like, it's weird because rewatching it now as an adult, my first thought is, oh, she's such a dick. Like, her moaning.
I'm going on record right now and saying Sarah is annoying as fuck.
She is. However, I went in and I was concerned. Like, from that opening sequence, I was like, God, she's like a cosplay thing. I was like, she's only getting away with being so weird because she's so hot, but she's super annoying. But they deal with it really early. Like, I think David Bowie, like, when their first encounter, says, that's so unfair, you say that a lot. I wonder what your basis for comparison is. And then you realize that the entire film is her, becoming a better person. So even though it's annoying and she is a dick, that's kind of the point of the film, because what this film surprisingly lacks, going back to it, are stakes. There are no stakes. There's no like, the greatest threat in this film is a bog that smells a bit. That's it. Like,
there are stakes, aren't there? She's going to lose her brother. Her brother will become a goblin.
No, sorry. Stakes. I apologize. You are right. Stakes is the wrong word. I mean threat. I do apologize.
Oh, okay. Like,
they never feel, other than those weird little soldiers who have those sticks with the fucking skinless monsters on them, which you mentioned Nightmare Fuel. That is top of the goddamn list. I forgot about those guys. But for the most part, there's no threat. And the whole film is just an array of kind of low stakes set pieces where she's just learning not to be a dick. So I was angry not angry, but I was like, oh, is this going to be a film where Sarah's just a bellend for the whole film? But I was like, oh no, that's kind of the point of the entire film. It's fine. But then equally, it reminded me that I couldn't remember any of the narrative to this film because there really isn't one.
No,
it's just, they just go from set piece to set piece to set piece, look at all the creatures, look how good it all looks, and then the movie just kind of ends.
with a party in her bedroom, but we'll get to the party in a bit.
Well, even before that, like they clearly didn't know, because again, there's no real threat between Jareth and Sarah other than he just keeps sending her back to the start of the labyrinth, which doesn't make sense because he also wants her to get to the end of the labyrinth. And then it just ends with, you have no power over me, which is a pony way for Jareth, the king of the goblins, to go. He's like, oh, I hope she doesn't remember the line, the really easy line. Oh, and then she remembers it and it's the end of the film. And
the other line as well, where she's talking to Toby about how I want the goblins to take you away. And they're going, say it. And, oh, she said it wrong. Like, it's meant to be like supercalifragilistic. This word.
Yeah, exactly.
I wish the goblins would take you away. What? It's the easiest fucking thing to remember in the world, and you said it really wrong in the first place. Like, what the fuck is going on?
And she's like, she spends the start of the film practicing lines, and it's like she can't remember like the most base. Like you said, if it was supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, something really nailed, or some old English shit, you know, or Klaatu Barada Nikto, you know, like in Evil Dead, maybe. But the fact that she can't remember like 3 or 4 pretty basic words is something like that's what the whole fucking movie swings on, is her ability to remember a couple of words. Come the fuck on.
So what is the narrative of this, right? Because she's dressed up she's dressed up in weird garb in the middle of a park at the beginning of the film, talking to an owl in daylight. Okay, I appreciate that can happen. So she's talking to an owl in daylight, and she's going off a script from a book or something. But that book is real, and that's based on Jareth's life or something. Like, what? How is all this?
Well, that's one of the things with this film, especially with the end when they all come back into the room, as you mentioned there. It's like, is this a fantasy film, or is this a movie about a loner having a mental breakdown? Like, that's, you know, maybe she's actually misplaced the baby, and then everything from that is a fever dream, because like there are so many, I guess we call them Easter eggs nowadays. But like everything that happens in the film is basically already in a room. There's like the MC Escher painting, like, you know, the labyrinth and a labyrinth sequence. I don't know what you want to call it. That bit looks amazing, by the way. But there's a Jareth statue. There's like cuddly toys based on all the characters. So all the stuff that actually happens is already in a room. And you're talking about a girl who clearly has an overactive imagination anyway and wants to escape to a fantasy land. So by the end of the film, I'm like, did that happen? Or did she just have a mental breakdown? And I'm thinking it might have been the latter. There's no suggestion that any of this is real. Like, even when it's all like they all come to her room, to me, that could just be the moment when she clearly has lost her fucking mind.
Imagine.
When the fantasy world and the real world have connected and she's just lost the plot.
Can you imagine the parents opening the door and listening to her having a party, and it's just there, just bouncing around in a room to nothing?
It's just her.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, can't you see Ludo and Lord Didymus? No, we fucking can't. And it's a shame because you mentioned earlier, like the creatures, they are like is it Didymus? Sir Didymus, sorry. He almost steals the show. But if ever there was an argument for physical effects over CG, I think it's actually Ludo. Now, Ludo is quite annoying, like his voice is quite annoying, and he's something of a deus ex machina for the film, because every time they're in trouble, he just does his rock call and everything's fucking fine. But in terms of a physical creature on screen, supposedly it took 2 people to work him. It's unbelievable. Like, it's still so impressive to see that on the screen. And again, this kind of era of mid to late 80s, when physical effects were still at the forefront, like they hold up so well. But this is one of those weird movies and one of the first instances where there is a clear divide between physical effects and CG. And a big part of that is because Jim Henson worked with Lucasfilm on this. Yeah. This is one of their first movies. And George Lucas is actually a producer on this film, which I had no idea about. But you can see that divide of, like, you know, Jim Henson, all these physical effects and all these puppets. And then at the start of the film, you have the Lucasfilm or LucasArts, whatever you want to call it, Lucasfilm, sorry, the owl, the CG owl, which actually looks, dare I say, okay by 1986 standards.
By 1986 standards, it looks absolutely fine. Let's go back to what you said about physical effects. Mm-hmm. And you said Ludo. You get the best physical effect in this has to be strapping a Didymus puppet to a dog and just letting the dog run wild.
It is quite fun.
But that poor puppet flapping in the wind as that dog's running around.
What it reminded me of, like the closest thing to it in terms of physical effects, I think, is something like a Willow, where you go back and you have like, really amazing physical effects, and then you have some slightly dodgy CG, but a lot of it, like, I mentioned earlier the fact that she had the MC Escher picture on her wall. That sequence with her and Bowie, and they're walking, obviously one's above the other and stuff, that 100% holds up. That I was like, this still looks amazing, and not one of those, that looks good for 1986. No, this just looks good. And there's another bit when... Sorry, Karen.
I had another Willow thing in my mind when she was doing the arrows on the floor and those weird things kept turning them round.
Totally a Willow scene, yeah.
Brownies, weren't they? They felt like brownies to me. Like the way they were laughing and moving and stuff.
Yeah, it wasn't just they were small. I thought the exact same thing. They sounded like them. They looked like them. They were just brownies in this film.
Yeah.
100% crossover. There's a couple of weird crossovers. Like another one, like the music at the start. And I think Top Gun came first because they were both released in the same year. But that single, the single that was used for this film, which is used in the opening credits, the start of it, I was like, wait, are they just playing Top Gun? Like, it's got like the guitar intro. It just sounds like it's going to go into goddamn Top Gun. I don't know who's stolen from who. I suspect they stole from Top Gun, but hey, it is what it is. But yeah, that sequence is very much Willow. But for the most part, and I think the reason that this movie has stood the test of time is that there's nothing else quite like it. There's some other Jim Henson films. I know some people like The Dark Crystal and stuff, but I'm not convinced there's another film where you're like, oh, that's kind of like Labyrinth, because this is his own utterly batshit movie in many respects. And a big part of it is the fact that, and I think one of the reasons this film is held up and is so beloved is because it's from this era of like really dark fantasy films for kids, supposedly. I'm doing the bunny ears.
This is one of the creepiest kids films ever. If you look into the subtext of it, it is creepy as fuck.
It is. But a lot of the films around the time, I think of the films I grew up with. It was like Time Bandits, Legend, The Never End. Even though, just to be clear, I've never seen The Never Ending Story, which almost seems like a miracle. But a lot of these films, they have like a really dark side to them, which I think is maybe lacking from modern films. And that's what this has got. Like on the surface, it's bright and breezy. Oh, look, it's Jim Henson puppets. But like you said, the undertones for this film are actually quite dark. And because there's maybe not that traditional narrative or meaning running through it, everything just feels weird as shit. And I think that's why people still enjoy this film when they're older, because when you watch it when you're younger, obviously you're like, oh, look, monsters, everything's fine. You don't really care about the narrative. You're just watching it for the eye candy, as it were. Yeah. And then when you get older, you're like, man, this film's weird as fuck. It's like the cinematic equivalent of SpongeBob SquarePants. It can very much be watched in both ways. You can totally watch this film stoned, 100%.
Was this the only film directed by Jim Henson? Oh, no, he did The Dark Crystal as well, didn't he?
He did The Dark Crystal as well. Well, it was a weird one, this film, for Jim Henson, because supposedly this sent him into something of a funk. I mean, you mentioned the fact that it made 30-something million, but that was seen as a box office flop, which actually led me into, when I was reading articles for this film, one of the things that came up was that it was a cult movie. I was like, I'm not sure if I buy into this film as being a cult film, if it's really successful. And the fact is, it actually wasn't, but it has this really weird kind of box office history. So it was... What was it? It was, let me find the notes I have on this. Labyrinth opened at number 8 in the US box office with 3.5 million and placed it like 7th in the chart. It was behind like Karate Kid Part 2, Back to School, Legal Eagles, Ruthless People, Running Scared, Top Gun, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. By the end of its run in the US, the film had grossed 12.7 million, just over half its 25 million budget. And in the US, that was seen as a flop. Like in its second week, it dropped down to 13th. Like the soundtrack actually it was more profitable than the movie in the US. But then the film grossed 9 million in Japan. And then when it went to Europe in Christmas, because it was like back in the 80s, so it opened in the summer in the US and Japan, then opened in the winter in Europe. In the UK, it was number 1 at the box office over the whole Christmas period, made twice as much as anywhere else. It was big hits in like Spain, Bolivia, Venezuela, Australia, Brazil, Central America, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, Mexico, and Spain. It was big everywhere. But the important thing is it wasn't big in the one market that actually mattered the most, and that was the US. So Jim Henson thought of this film as being a massive flop because it didn't hit in the US specifically. But obviously, I think it was like one of the things people mentioned was that before he died in, I think it was the early 90s, wasn't it? it was already picking up traction on VHS and becoming this like really popular movie after the fact. Yeah. But obviously, you know, I don't think anyone would guess that 20, 30 years later, it's arguably even more popular. You know, I'm sure it's doing decent numbers on Netflix now where you can watch it.
Well, that's right. Everyone loves this film, don't they? That's the point. I mean,
but nobody in the US did when it opened. It was obviously too weird for the US, which is bizarre.
Yeah, but I think, as you've already said now, I think now, it one of those classic cult films. Everyone loves it. Everyone.
Well, yeah, that was my argument. I was like, I'm never sure if a film can be a cult film if it's successful, and I just assumed it had been a hit. But then you do the research, and it's like, no, it wasn't a hit, and that's why it is a cult film, I suppose, despite the fact that it was always popular in the UK. But yeah, it's definitely a cult hit nowadays. It's grown arms and legs, and it's one of the more beloved movies of the 80s. I mean, I mentioned the fact that we had someone writing in, don't say an unkind word about Labyrinth. Everyone I know had seen Labyrinth. Everyone. It's just one of those films, like, I'm not sure if it's the same with you and your friends growing up, but everyone had seen Labyrinth, and I think universally everyone loved it. And that's why I'm going to be very cautious about the whole, like, would you recommend it, blah, blah, blah.
That's what it does for us, though, doesn't it? Because we all remember as a kid, we all quote it, we all have the lines, although I've always misquoted that line, the one I did at the beginning. I always thought it was awful Castle, but it's just Castle. But you have the lines that you say, you have your scenes. I mean, I could go up to people my age now, except for you, apparently, last week, because you fucking mugged me off. Have you heard about The Babe?
Yeah.
The Babe with the Power.
I forgot that.
You do that. Speaking of that whole Babe with the Power thing, right? I said at the beginning that kid must still be in therapy, that Toby guy. And his name was Toby in real life as well. Mm-hmm. He's got to have some sort of PTSD if anybody ever sings that Magic Dance song, doesn't he? Because they're throwing this poor kid around. He's looking around and there's just goblins and things like.
Well, that was the thing. He's actually gone right the other way. He's embraced it, because I was thinking the exact same thing. I think there's one sequence you're probably thinking of in particular where he's sitting on the floor and he's surrounded by goblins. Yeah. And then you've got David Bowie just doing weird David Bowie shit. So it's like, oh, his name's Toby and his name's Toby, blah, blah, blah. But usually when you see like a baby on screen, that's pretty much it in terms of their IMDb. But while he did rise to prominence for his role as, you know, the baby who was wished away by goblins in Labyrinth, he subsequently became a puppeteer, sculptor, and fabricator for film, television, and theatre. He wrote and directed the 2014 fantasy short film Lessons Learned. He was the design supervisor of the 2019 version of The Dark Crystal: Age of Resistance. So he was like, he embraced it. I feel like he could have gone either way. He could have run as far away from this world as possible, or, you know, obviously on some kind of primordial level, he's enjoyed his time with the goblins and decided to stay in that world.
Either that, or what is it Batman said? Bats frighten me, so now it's time for others to feel my dread. So puppets frighten this kid so much, he's making other people feel it by just going that way.
Maybe that is the way to go. Maybe that is the way. It's like, well, they've ruined my life, I'm going to try and ruin everyone else's. And to an extent, I agree. I've never been a fan of the Dark Crystal. I find those puppets creepy as fuck. They kind of sit along like Moomins. Never like, I know they're not puppets, but those kind of, you know, there's certain things which are aimed towards children, which are just creepy. Like they're always borderline. Like you think of like, how were the Teletubbies so popular? Like they are nightmare fueled, but they've just kind of walked the line. And it's the same with stuff like the Dark Crystal, as I said, that, you know, the Moomins, where a lot of people love the Moomins, where I just see them, I just think they're weird as shit. But that was what the 80s specialized in, was like finding that line somewhere between creepy and scary and like pushing it to the limits, because kids like to be scared up to a point. And I think that's something that has been kind of lost in modern day cinema for kids, that's for sure. Because, you know, you go back and watch some of these 80s films, again, aimed at children, and like, man, there's some weird shit in this, which just used to it was just accepted. It was like, oh, it's fine, we'll just get on with it. Again, maybe it's the cocaine again, who knows?
When he said, like, one of the weirdest things as well was him doing the juggling with that ball, which I know wasn't him. But yeah. Like every time he did the juggle, it went to the back, and I'm pretty sure you probably had. I mean, I don't know if I put it in fact, but you've got somebody else's hands probably going through him, like he's got his hands behind.
Oh back. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, there was one. There's a couple of bits where it's just clearly like the back of someone else's head. You can get away with that because there's just so much goddamn hair. So yeah, it's an easy trick to pull off, I suppose. But yeah, some of the CG, like, sorry.
When we say about things changing, did you notice the stepmother when she spoke? She was like in a, I don't know, like an Asian kung fu film.
Well, the whole thing with the stepmom and the father, my big issue was I was watching, I was like, oh man, I bet you they're younger than me. Because, it's like that 80s thing, like their parents all look like they're 57. And then, of course, I look into it, and Shelley Thompson, who played the stepmother, was under 30 years old. I was like, oh my fucking days. And I was like, well, it's fine. The dad, played by Christopher Malcolm, he had to be older. He was still younger than me. He was like 39, 40. I was like, oh, dude.
Yeah, but even David Bowie was younger than you, mate.
Yeah, but he's a different beast. Like I said, he could be anywhere from 30 to 222 years old. He's David Bowie. That's a different beast. It's when I see everyday folk. That's my problem, especially ones who are playing parents.
She was ADR'd. I'm sure she was, because every time she spoke and the camera was on her face, the lip sync didn't match up. So I don't know what the hell she was saying before that.
I didn't even notice. I was clearly just too upset by the fact that she was so much younger than me, despite the fact that she's the old ass looking stepmom.
That's the problem you're going to have, though, isn't you? We've said it before. You rewatch these films, you realize everybody is younger than you now. All the people you knew as fathers, mothers, even like teenagers, people playing TV, you realize they're younger. You say, oh, that guy was probably 40 when he played a 13-year-old. No, he's probably 35, younger than you know.
Well, there are two things you notice in this film. Everyone's younger than me, and everyone's incredibly British. And it is one of the things I forgot about this film, is that it has such aggressively British sensibilities, to the point where I was like, God damn it, this feels like a Terry Gilliam film. I know I only mentioned Time Bandits earlier, but it has that kind of weird-ass vibe to it. And then, of course, who gets the final writing script on this film? Terry Jones of Monty Python fame. So it kind of makes sense, but I couldn't remember, because again, I hadn't seen this film for, say, 20 odd years, just how British it felt. And you mentioned earlier the fact that, you can speak to anyone other than me, apparently, and they'll remember the key points of this film. But I think it's that is the thing. This is a movie of moments. No, I don't think most people could explain what happens in this film. Like, if you'd asked me last week before I watched it, explain what happens in Labyrinth, I'm like, oh, she gets a brother's adopted, and then there's a goblin king, and there's a codpiece for some reason. I think it's a very hard film to explain. I'm not sure it matters, because this film is, again, all about just being imaginative in terms of what goes up on screen. And again, I think that's fundamentally the reason that it's aged so well. But in terms of plot, narrative, this film barely hangs together. But again, my argument is I'm not sure it really matters, because I think everything else in this film works. But despite the fact that everybody's motivations, other than Sarah's, where it is clearly just, all right, consumerism is bad, you become a better person. That's basically the film. And here's David Bowie for some particular reason.
We haven't really mentioned Hoggle, have we?
No, I'm not sure if I'm the biggest fan of Hoggle, to be honest, or Fred, or whatever the fuck he's called. I don't know. He's one of my least favorite characters in the film, but he gets a lot of screen time.
That's because Hoggle goes on a journey as well, doesn't he? Because he starts off as a pussy, basically, and he'll do anything just to save himself and everything. And then by the end of it, it's all about Sarah and protecting Sarah and his friends. So, but he's an odd little duck as well, isn't he? Because his head is massive. The rest of
again, we think of it as maybe being odd now. For 80s fantasy cinema, it wasn't. They specialized in giving, and apologies if I'm using the wrong term here, but dwarves jobs. I'm not sure if they're getting the same kind of work. I know there was the Willow TV show recently, but again, I mentioned Time Bandits, Return of the Jedi, Masters of the Universe with Gwildor. There was always a weird ass. Let's be clear, a dwarf dressed up as a weird character. What was it? I was watching Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey recently, and they had the whole station thing. Again, dwarves in suits. Yeah. That was just what happened in the 80s. So he seems odd looking back now, but if you've gone back and watched as many 80s films as we have, you're like, oh, they're in half the 80s films. They totally just weird. No. We're like, oh, let's just put a dude in a suit and that's it. And I think we can blame Star Wars for that to a certain extent.
I'll give it a credit. It's actually Hoggle was played by a woman, Shari Weiser.
Yeah. Yeah, she didn't do the voice, I assume, unless she was on it's 60 a day.
Yeah, I'd say because not dude in a suit, obviously, lady in a suit.
Lady in a suit.
I don't know. It was just the head, and obviously all the pits in his face, and Hoggle's led a hard life. Probably
he has, but it comes back to the whole thing again about the fact that people weren't afraid to slightly scare kids. A lot of the characters in these films were weird. weird looking little fuckers. They were really cute. And that is one of the things in this film, other than maybe Sir Didymus, and even he's got teeth and he's a bit weird. Very few of the characters are what you would call cute, are they? They're always quite disturbing, quite dark. Again, imaginative for sure, but would you, if you were 7, 8, you've got a son, would you buy a cuddly toy version of any of the characters in this film and stick it on the wall? Fuck that. Nowadays it's all about making things cute, I think. And back then they're let's just make it creepy as fuck, basically. And he's certain, again, he's the thing is, he's not even creepy and interesting way. He's just kind of gross. He just looks like a little old man. That's his shtick, basically.
Said about cuddly toys of creepy things. Our friend Dave, his daughter, she has from me a cuddly toy of a face hugger.
Oh, that's adorable. Although I would argue that's less weird, because that's almost she's into horror stuff. It's a cuddly toy version of something which is definitively gross. Nobody's trying to pass off a face hugger in the movies as anything other than horrifying. So it's almost kind of oh, look, it's ironic because it's a horrendous face hugger, but it's cute. I would find it much more disturbing if you bought a Poggle fucking cuddly toy. 100%. That would be so much more disturbing as far as I'm concerned. I would take the face hugger over Poggle, put it that way.
Let's talk about the weird fire dancing bird things. What the fuck was that about?
Chili Down with the Fire Gang. That's what they're singing, in case anyone was wondering, because I was like, what the hell are they going on about? Now, all right, for the most part in this film, I think the characters are just about justifiable, because clearly Jim Henson's been given, free reign. Do what you want, throw in as many characters as you want, and he goes to town in this film. Yeah. And for the most part, it works until we get to those horrendous red bird things who take off their heads. I mentioned the fact that there isn't much threat in this film. I think they're pretty much planning on taking off her head and ripping off her
limb. They want to see if her head comes off her shoulders, yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's a genuine threat. I'll give you that one. But more, it's just a threat to my mental well-being, because that is an acid dream in a movie of acid dreams. It's such a bizarre sequence, and it's easily my least favorite part of the film. Easily. If we're going to go to loves and hates, I'm jumping ahead here. Yeah. But despite the fact that the whole Chili Down with the Fire Gang did annoyingly get in my head, which I'm almost disappointed with myself about, that whole sequence, I'm like, it doesn't need to be in this film. It you could remove that and add, I don't know, a bit of narrative, a bit more kind of dialogue between Bowie and Sarah, anything along those lines. Just get rid of the goddamn Fire Gang.
Speaking of scenes, what did you think about the junk lady scene?
It's weird. I mean, that whole sequence is just basically consumerism and capitalism is bad. It's a lot of the lessons to be learned in this film aren't particularly subtle. Oh, friends are good, consumerism is bad. That whole section is just that. It's it's weird now because, I almost kind of associate it with Disney, which isn't correct. But the idea of it being this anti-consumerism, anti-capitalist film. But that's what that little sequence feels like to me.
That whole junk lady scene happened after she was given a date rape drug by Holly.
Yeah, she was. She was.
Yeah, because Jareth provided the date rape drug. I mean, I'm sorry.
But again, right, if you take away how disturbing it is that it is a date rape drug, and that's what it is basically, it's what is Jareth trying to achieve? So let's get down to the fact. Is he trying to stop her from getting to the center of the labyrinth, which would suggest that he is just there for baby Toby. He just wants baby Toby. But of course, by the end, he makes it, like you said, with that quote at the start about I will be your slave. He obviously wants Sarah there. But that runs contrary to the idea that he wants to keep setting her back to the start.
So I wonder if, because he moves the time down as well, doesn't he? She says, the labyrinth is easy, and he moves the time. So I wonder if his plan is to make her just so destitute by the end of it. It's right, I will be your bride to save Toby. I can't save Toby on my own. I will. So he's doing all this for her to actually finally give in. That's the way I see it.
I think that's probably a decent shout.
Kidnapping these kids for hundreds and hundreds of years, and maybe.
Where are we getting that from? Has he been doing that?
Mate, all those goblins are kids that never got rescued and became goblins.
Is that what they are?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't get that at all.
Yes.
I didn't get that at all. That seems quite obvious now, but I didn't get that at all.
All those goblins are kids that became goblins that he's taken because they've said the words, I wish the goblins would come and take you. So
Oh, I
So what I'm
see.
assuming is that he's taken these before, they
Hmm.
become goblins, but Sarah's the first one he's fallen in love with, I guess.
Maybe.
That's what I said. Has there been Sarahs in the past? That's what I said in my intro. Has there been Sarahs?
I think maybe that like she is the first Sarah, like with her power of imagination, perhaps she's
Yeah.
managed to kind of make her way into this world. But again, I'm not against the idea that this is all in her head and she's having a mental breakdown. I just want to put that out there.
Oh yeah, I mean, to be fair, it's more a mental breakdown than there's a goblin king somewhere kidnapping kids and turning them into goblins.
Yeah, maybe. And again, the whole idea about the Goblin King not looking like a goblin, I still find that kind of weird, but it is what it is.
Yeah, but no goblin looks alike.
Well, most of the other ones at least look vaguely like goblins. The other one looks like David Bowie, but I guess if you have David Bowie or David Bowie, however you want to pronounce it, in your movie, you can't dress him up as too much prosthetics. Like obviously, you give him the codpiece, that goes without saying. You give him the very '80s hair, but you want David Bowie to still be
I'm
David
still
Bowie. And the
adamant.
great thing with it's if you have David Bowie in a film, he's already weird enough to fit into whatever fancy world you want to put him into.
Yeah.
There's a reason he was the alien and the man who fell to Earth? Yeah. That's
Man
the
fell
one.
to earth.
Yeah. Because he's already quite alien just by standard, by
I'm
definition.
still adamant he brought that codpiece from home. But
Maybe.
I mean, because obviously he has.
So just be clear, you don't think we would have had the codpiece if, say, and I'm jumping on like maybe facts or legacy, I don't know, but some of the other people up for the role, because I was wondering, it's like, did the music come first or did David Bowie come first? And obviously, I think the plan was always to have music in it, but then by getting David Bowie, that dictates what kind of music is subsequent in the film, and you end up with the bangers like what is it? Ah, my God,
That's Magic Dance.
Magic Dance, yeah, that's the one. But supposedly some of the other people up for the role were Michael Jackson. Very, very different movie. But again, it's not ridiculous in 1986. He was already tiptoeing into movies. A lot of his music videos are basically short films at this point. I think Jim Henson originally wanted Sting. Again, not quite as weird as Bowie, but quite bizarre in his own way. And the other one I think was Mick Jagger. Again, brings a different vibe, but can you see Mick Jagger in this film? Potentially.
Do you know who I can see in this film
Who's that?
from the 80s? Billy Idol.
Billy, again, not wait. I was going to say Billy Idol was in June, but that was Sting, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was Sting.
Yeah, Sting, of course. Well, yeah, Billy Idol. The thing is now, of course, all you can picture is David Bowie, and it's one of the more bizarre things because David Bowie, one of the most famous recording artists of all time. But for people of our generation, I think when you say David Bowie, for a lot of us, the first thing we think of is Labyrinth. And it's probably one of the reasons he's not too keen on the film. But, obviously, when you think of David Bowie's like greatest musical output, I think a lot of people would consider it to be like 60s, the 70s, sorry. So by 86, it wasn't like he was releasing banger after banger. Obviously I was aware that he was releasing music, but I definitely knew David Bowie primarily as the fucking dude from Labyrinth.
Yeah.
Was it the same for you?
I think we're in that age where, David Bowie growing up, David Bowie, first and foremost, to me, was the guy from Labyrinth.
Yeah,
then,
I think so.
He made good, didn't he? He became a singer after he did Labyrinth.
I think it's one of those ones, I was aware that he was a singer, but I don't know, like, I'm not sure if many kids in the 80s were listening to David Bowie. Like I was listening to Michael Jackson and shit like that. I wasn't listening to David Bowie. So he was, primarily he was the dude with the codpiece from Labyrinth. But it speaks to his performance that he's so memorable in this film. Like he hasn't had a huge number of acting credits, but in most films he's in, he's good. Like, you think of him in The Prestige. Like, again, it's a weird performance, but it's a fucking... and that is one of the things I guess you can always say about David Bowie. He was always memorable. And if nothing else, with actually not a huge amount to work with in this film, he is nothing if not...
Yeah, memorable. I mean, you're not hiring David Bowie to be the love interest in a rom-com, are you? You're hiring him to be...
the love interest in a weird 40-year-old stalking a 16-year-old girl. Yeah,
I mean, it's not love interest at that point, is it? You've hired him to become a groomer at that point.
Yeah, I don't know what the deal is. I'm still not sure what his aim was with Sarah. But like you said, based on what you said, he's trying to add to his weird tiny goblin army. So he's taking the kid, and it's not the first time. So that's his aim. And then the whole thing with Sarah, it wasn't planned. It's like he's fallen in love with her as she's tried to save him. So he wasn't grooming her. He was there for the baby, which sounds quite dark in itself. But he was just there for Toby. He's like, listen, I'm going to take Toby. I'm going to add another little goblin to my army. Everything's going to be fine. And then Sarah shows up and he's like, man, I quite like this Sarah girl. And they're like, dude, she's 16. It's like, listen, that's legal here. It's fine. You know, so I don't know. I know what to do this, but that's what I'm going to go with. Straight, and needless to say, it's a strange fucking movie. It's a strange movie.
It's great though. It is a good watch. It is fun to watch, but it's
that is the thing. I feel like maybe people will think, oh, we're like tearing this film apart. Like, I'm not at all. I really enjoyed this film. But my wife, though, she did say she hadn't seen it for a while either, and she grew up loving it. And she's like, I remember it being better. And I was like, I think you remember it making more sense.
Yeah,
I think it's like a weird fever dream of a film. It's really unique. It's really fun. It's not without its faults. Let's make that fucking clear. But I can understand why it stood the test of time that way.
I said you said we're not tearing this film down. If you want to hear us tear down a 1986 film, go listen to Flight of the Navigator. Jesus Christ, then you'll see the difference.
Well, that's the thing. Thinking back to that film, I never really listened to our podcast, but I was like, do we tear that film to pieces, or are we just like, it's just not great? I feel like we've had instances where I've torn a film to pieces, or you've torn a film to pieces, and we've actively have like hated it or disliked it. But I feel like the Flight of the Navigator, it was just almost like, it's all right. It's not very good. We just didn't like it that much.
I think we threw some shade on that film.
There was definitely some shade. But that was the thing. I just kind of came out and just went, people love this film, and I just don't really get it. It's a 2-star film. It's fine. It is what it is. All right, should we move on to favorite scenes?
Yeah. Do you want me to go first?
Right, cool. Yeah, go for it, bud.
For me, it's the dance magic scene. Mm-hmm. It shows exactly what you can do with, I mean, not just David Bowie singing that song, but you can do with the Muppets. You know, you've got, and I've got it all in facts about how many Muppets they used and goblin costumes. But you've got, as you said, I mean, the real term, little people, dwarves. I'm sorry, I don't know the actual right term, but you've got a bunch of them in the actual costumes. Then you've got the puppeteers and things and it's so good. And then you've got the only thing about that film, about that scene that doesn't stand the test of time is when they're chucking the baby to each other, and the baby is clearly a little ragdoll at that point.
Yeah. Which I'm glad it was a ragdoll rather than just throwing the baby around. To be honest, I'm not sure if I trust David Bowie just lobbing a baby around.
The baby goes very, very limp when they start chucking it.
Dude, I don't even like people throwing around their own babies. Like, we had friends over a couple of weeks ago, and one of them brought their little kids, like, 1 year old or whatever. And his dad, it's up to him, whatever. He just started throwing that baby up in the air and catching him. I could not fucking look. I was like, I don't know if this guy's a catcher or a dropper. What the fuck, man? If he drops that baby in my house, am I in any way culpable? I just I don't even like holding babies, let alone throwing babies. Fuck that noise.
People used to have the same thing with me when my child was just born, because they'd hold him gently with two arms. They say, "Oh, can I hold the baby?" Say, "Yeah, you can hold it." And I'd scoop him up with one arm. And I just move him over with one hand and pop him on. They go, "What are you doing?" "Well, I'm giving you the baby." Like, why?
People have the same thing with. It's different, obviously, when it's yours. And I don't have any children, but I do have cats. And we had friends over, and I pick up my cats by the scruff.
Yeah.
And when one of them saw it, they're like, "What the fuck?" And I actually got told off by my wife once because we were like cat sitting for someone else, and I picked up their cat by the scruff. She said, "You cannot do that. You cannot pick up someone else. It's fine if it's your cat. You can't pick up someone else's cat by the scruff." Well, all right, fair enough. That's just how I pick up cats, apparently.
Don't grab another kid by the leg and just swing them around.
Yeah. I don't think I'm just lobbing your kid to you. I mean, like you said, you just picked up your baby with one hand and handed it to someone else. How would you feel if someone had done the same to you, but with your kid? You might have been like, "That's a bit fucking familiar."
Yeah, exactly right. Because I can do it because I know my.
You have confidence in it, and it's your kid. Yeah.
And as people have said, I've got hands the size of shovels. So
that helps. Yeah. If you get Dave with his little girly hands trying to like scoop up your baby and hand to you, like, "Whoa, fucking hell, Dave! Jesus Christ, your hands aren't manly enough to be doing this."
If somebody did it one-handed, I wouldn't be. It wouldn't be because I don't want to say it's my property, but it's like, I know what I'm doing.
It kind of is. I think it's your property. You take care of it. You feed it. It's your property for now.
I know what I'm doing with my child. It's only me to blame, kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. It's different there. In terms of my favorite scene, I mean, if it was 15-year-old me, the answer was the dream sequence at the trippy ball, because I fell in love with Jennifer Connelly there.
Yeah.
But now it's, I mean, the magic dance is a super memorable scene. The song's fantastic, but it's probably the MC Escher sequence because I just think it holds up so well.
It's
it's
good.
like, it's super trippy. It looks fantastic. It's one of the few sequences where you really get Sarah and Sarah and Jareth on screen together for an extended period. I wish there was more stuff like that, but I think it's the MC Escher sequence is probably my favorite.
Which leads us really good into loves, because for me, my first love is the way it looks, especially the MC Escher sequence. It looks on screen, it looks beautiful. It stands up to this day. All of it, like the way the Muppets are, even the CGI at the beginning, the CGI owl. I think it all. Yeah,
there's only a couple of sequences where, like, there's a bit where he's holding the ball and it's clearly a CG bit, and the bit when she shatters the glass, it's quite clearly a CG. But some other bits, like the bit when you mentioned at the start with like the little caterpillar, and he's like, "Oh, you need to look differently," and like the way the wall disappears. Even now, I'm watching it, I'm like, "Where's the wall?" And then she suddenly walks to it. It looks fucking amazing, that sequence. But for the most part, the visuals totally hold up.
My second love, the caterpillar, the worm. I wish there was more of him. Like, I don't know, like he was great. He stole the show in that little scene that he has. Come in, have a cup of tea. Come meet the missus. Like, just everything about him, he was really good. And my third was how much fun David Bowie is having. Like, he seems to be loving what he's doing. He seems to be on screen. He's having a fun old time with.
Well, I think he's one of these people because he's held in such high regard, and it's David Bowie. It's like, are you going to be the person who tells David Bowie what to do? Obviously, I'm not saying you won't give him direction, but are you going to be the person who says, "Oh no, David, you can't do that. You can't have the codpiece. You can't deliver the line that way." You're like, listen, if you hire David Bowie, you can't. I assume you have to just kind of like roll with the punches to a certain extent. And it's all the better for it. Like, he's the wild card in this film, isn't he? Like, there's a lot of imagination going on, but the thing that holds it together is just how bizarre David Bowie's character is as Jareth. And like I said, one of my big issues with the film is that he's not on screen more than he is, but when he is, he totally steals the show.
Yeah.
Which comes to my loves. Number one, David Bowie with a bullet. She's a bit of a monarch, but Jennifer Connelly, number two, I think she's fantastic in this film. Not just because I, fell in love with her growing up. Number three, the sheer imagination and great combination of Jim Henson physical effects and what was then at least cutting edge Lucasfilm effects. And I know you kind of singled out, obviously, the little caterpillar, but I will give special mention to just the wide array of characters on screen. Like, the creatures all, like, whether even the fire gang, as disturbing as they are memorable. They're fucking memorable in the worst possible way. But every character, like, most of them only drop in. They're there for like a scene, a couple of minutes, and then they're gone, never to be seen again. But they all leave their mark. And again, one of the reasons I think this film, the reason it works and the reason it stood the test time.
Cool. So my hates would be the creepy fire gang.
Yeah, that's my number one as well, 100%.
Sarah annoyed the fuck out of me. I mean, she started to get a bit better towards the end, but I don't know, the whiny voice and things like that. I just,
like I said, I think I kind of started with the idea that she has to be a dick at the start for the movie to work. But when you do start watching it, and of course, when you've grown up, you're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, is your like, stress-free middle-class life upsetting? Lives in this like lovely town in America, and you're like, what have you got to moan about?" But they do make it pretty clear that she's the idiot. Like, she really does have nothing to moan about. It's just a shame that she has to go to a fantasy land to learn her lesson. And she's a bit of a dick. Like one night, I know she has to stay on a Friday. I don't know what her plans were. She's complaining about the fact that, I've got to stay in on a Friday. There's no suggestion she has any friends. She's clearly a loner. Yeah. A bit of a geek in at a time where maybe being a geek wasn't so popular. And I was like, well, what exactly were your plans? You just got to take care of this kid? And then she immediately wishes him away to the Goblin Land? Fucking give me a break, Sarah. I'm with you apparently now. Jesus Christ.
And my final hate, because in order to make me feel better, I'm going to have to bring it in. The creepy subtext of the love interest between David Bowie and Sarah. Like, Jareth, not David Bowie, Jareth and Sarah. I won't throw David Bowie under the bus. Jareth and Sarah. The whole... the whole date rape drug thing.
I wonder if he's had like the explanation, because again, if we're going on the basis that the plan initially at least wasn't for Sarah, it was for Toby. And then at some points, like, he spotted her and it's like, oh, I quite like this Sarah girl. And then when the goblin's like, I think she's 16, sir. Whoa, don't tell me that. Don't tell I never want to hear the numbers. Jesus Christ. Or maybe he's just like, well, this is my kingdom. I make the rules. I don't know. But yes, it is a little bit.
Like, it's like, Kelly, look at her. She looks old enough. It's fine.
She looks old. And Jesus Christ. Look at his eyebrows. There's no way a 16-year-old girl has eyebrows like that. It's ridiculous.
But yeah, I'm throwing that in my hate just to make me feel better, make me feel like that I can sleep tonight.
Well, I mean, it happens in a lot of films. Like, and again, if it's the other way around, it seems to be accepted. I watched Shazam 2, Fury of the Gods yesterday. I think it's just called Shazam, Fury of the Gods. And spoiler alert, I'm going to say a spoiler, the young girl in it isn't really a young girl. She is like 3,000 years old or some nonsense like that. But she's clearly getting on with one of the kids in the film who's like 16. So she's like 3,000, but she looks 16 and she's getting with a kid who's 16. And they do mention like very briefly in the film, like, oh, that's kind of a bit weird, but they let it go because she's a girl and he's a boy. If it's the other way round in 2023, that doesn't make it to the screen. If a 16-year-old boy is actually 3,000 years old and he's trying to lay pipe with a 16-year-old girl, no fucking way is that making it on screen. No way.
And I totally understand that. But when you look as the Goblin King, when you look like David Bowie, right?
Yeah, I'll give you that.
Okay. I'm not.
No, I'm not arguing. It's fucking weird. It's fucking weird. Hate number one, Chili Down with the Fire Gang. I almost my greatest hate is how much the song got stuck in my head. I was like, this song's terrible. This is ridiculous. And as soon as I learned what the words were, I started singing them. So yeah, kind of fucked myself, I suppose. Number two, the codpiece is mega distracting. Every time it's on the screen. Sure, it's super memorable. There's a fucking web page about it. I think for a lot of people, if you say, if you played one of those word games, like association games, if I say Labyrinth, what do you say? You probably just go codpiece. It's just one of those things, but it is distracting. And the fact that the parents are both younger than me is an absolute sickener. I'm not, especially the stepmom, who's way younger than me, which is super upsetting. But they're my hates. Are there any alternative titles to this film? I mean, or is it just Labyrinth? No, I can imagine there might be a couple of Labyrinth, I don't know, Cobra, or whatever it was from last week. What was it last week for Cobra? Stallone Cobra?
Stallone Cobra.
That was the title of the fucking film? If you tell me in Bulgaria this film was known as Bowie, Labyrinth, I'm going to lose my mind.
No, it's none of that. You are right. There's a lot, like, in regards to the Labyrinth stuff. So, Brazil is Labyrinth, the magic of time.
Okay, yeah.
Denmark, the Labyrinth of the Wizard King's castle. Sorry, castle.
Castle. A bit long-winded. That's all right. I can't decide how to say Bowie. Bowie? I don't know.
Germany, the journey into the labyrinth.
They're all just a bit long-winded. Just call it Labyrinth, dude.
Hungary, a fantastic maze.
Yeah, that's pony.
Right.
That sounds like the straight to VHS rip-off of this film.
Yeah, the asylum version.
Yeah, 100%.
Iceland and India had the same one, and I'm wondering if because there's not a translation for Labyrinth. They're both called Maze. So
just Maze.
Just Maze. I'm wondering if
it's
not the translation for Labyrinth or
Yeah, I get that. That's fair enough.
Italy, Labyrinth, where anything is possible.
Yeah, sounds like an advert. I'm not really buying that.
Spain, inside of the labyrinth.
No. Again, just superfluous words, just not required. Like, we get it. It's a labyrinth. It's like, you might as well call it Lost in the Labyrinth. Not sure where to go in the labyrinth. It's like, fucking give it a break, guys.
Japan, I'll learn this down here. Labyrinth, Demon King's Labyrinth.
That's fantastic. And that probably sounds fantastic in Japanese, like written down. Like, you see the titles for these video games, you're like, come on, those aren't real Japanese words. This is ridiculous. But yeah, fair play to them.
Yep. So they put Labyrinth in there twice. It was the Labyrinth, Demon King's Labyrinth.
I mean, they really are going overboard there, aren't
they?
I mean, I'm telling you, it's like, it just needs to be Labyrinth. They're like, no, we need Labyrinth in there twice. We can't call it Labyrinth. So, yeah.
And we're not calling him a Goblin King. He's the Demon King as well.
Oh, fair enough.
Yeah.
Again, that could be a cultural thing. Do you have any facts? I know there's quite a few. We may have covered some of them already.
Yeah, we've covered a few. I'll go into more detail on what you said about everything being in Sarah's room. So the sources of the characters can be seen in Sarah's bedroom. So she has a stuffed animal that looks like Sir Didymus on a dresser, a doll that looks like Ludo on the shelves next to a door, along with the book where the wild things are, as the camera pans across the desk. A fiery doll on a shelf next to a bed. Bookends with goblins reminiscent of Hoggle on a dresser. A figurine of Jareth on the right-hand side of a desk after you see the Hoggle bookend. There's a scrapbook shown. It shows newspaper clippings of Sarah's famous actress mum with another man, David Bowie. In addition, the dress that she wears in the ballroom scene can also be seen adorning the miniature doll in a music box, and a wooden maze game on a dresser next to a book is reminiscent of the hedge section of the Labyrinth. There is also a small painting on a wall that depicts a contraption, much like the one operated by the cleaners, from which Sarah and Hoggle had to escape. And there's a copy of the famous picture by MC Escher, which is used in the room where the final confrontation with Jareth occurs. So
she definitely had a mental breakdown, and this definitely didn't happen.
Yeah,
we're making all these arguments. What are the intentions of Jareth and stuff? It doesn't matter. He doesn't exist. She's just gone insane.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, fair enough.
The dance magic scene consisted of over 48 Muppets, 52 puppeteers, and 8 people in goblin costumes. So that was a lot of work.
But it pays off. It totally pays off.
Yeah.
It always beats CG. Like that, just the fact that you can have those physical interactions with characters, it just makes it so much more impactful, I think.
A Hoggle puppet got lost on an airplane and remained undiscovered until it turned up at the unclaimed baggage center in Scottsboro, Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
When a worker opened the crate, he got a scare by the sight of the puppet. It is now on display in the museum. So the reason why I said that goes back to saying that Hoggle looked creepy as shit. Can you imagine opening a crate and just seeing that thing staring?
A Hoggle head.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, my brother bought me a head for my birthday, which was quite disturbing. Yeah, it was like when I opened the box and it was just a head in a box. I was like, he's bought me a head in a box? What the fuck? And I didn't know who it was. It was just like this white porcelain head in a box. And then I realized it's supposed to be Jack Torrance from The Shining. And I was like, it's still pretty creepy. And it's him trying to get through the door. So the idea is you put his head between 2 books. And of course, I've got like a whole number of Stephen King books. So I'd put his head between 2 Stephen King books. And then suddenly it started to make sense. And so my wife came in and said, there's no fucking way you're putting that head on the cupboard in the living room. That's not going on display. So again, it's hidden in a cupboard. The idea being you open the cupboard where the other books are held. The books are held against their will. I've got another bunch of books down one of the drawers. Is that you open up and there's just a head staring at you. So hopefully
you need to put it on a shelf in the hallway when you wake up in the middle of the night to go take a piss. And you just walk back.
Yeah. Or maybe I could do is it Hoggle or Poggle? I forgot his name now. Hoggle. I feel like maybe I should just kind of just put him like in a bag, send him off to God knows where, and one day somebody will open it and scare themselves like the whole Hoggle situation. But who knows? It might be for the best if that head is just removed from my house.
I mean, that picture you sent me, that thing is creepy as shit.
It is pretty goddamn creepy. Thanks, John. Thanks. That was an amazing gift. He does listen to this podcast. And like I said, I turned the corner pretty quick on that. When I put it between the 2 books for a second, I was like, oh, dude, I actually kind of want to keep that on the shelf. But yeah, there are some battles you can't win. And my wife made it very clear that head was not staying out on display. I was like, all right, fair enough. I know when I'm not going to win an argument.
David Bowie did double duty with this. He obviously he sang Dance Magic Dance and he was Jareth the Goblin King, but he also did the gurgling voice for Toby in that scene.
Yeah, I heard his gurgling wasn't up to scratch. So David Bowie had to step in and gurgle for him.
I mean, wow. To help the puppeteer inside him to see, there was a miniature video camera in Ludo's right horn that fed to a small television monitor mounted inside the puppet's stomach.
Again, I think people, like, if you're a kid now, it probably is worth stressing just how much technology that would have been inside Ludo. And it's one of the reasons that Ludo supposedly weighed he was so heavy, like the whole suit. And of course, if you've got all that technology, you think of like what a video camera looked like in 1986. You had to put it on your shoulder, as was its weight. So if you had all this like equipment to have a screen in your stomach, it would have weighed so much. There would have been so much technology in Ludo, but it pays off, I think.
Right, I'll do the final one. This should put to bed the whole therapist issue for the baby. So the baby who played Toby was Toby Froud. He was the son of Brian Froud, who was the conceptual designer for this movie and The Dark Crystal. Mm-hmm. So obviously the guy was like, "Oh no, it's fine. We got puppets in the house. It's fine."
He's grown up with them. He's grown up with them,
and he's following his father's footsteps, obviously. So maybe not so much therapy then.
Oh, so Toby's fine. So it really was just like he's grown up with these horrors in his life, since being a baby. So he's become accustomed to it and he's just embraced it rather than, kind of actively trying to scare other people like Batman. So basically what we're saying is Toby Froud is not Batman.
No, Toby Froud is not Batman.
Toby Froud is not Batman. In terms of legacy, we've already covered, the fact that this was a big cult hit because there's another movie that proved the power of VHS. The fact that it was a cult hit simply because it didn't do well in the US. Many kids from the 80s and 90s primarily associate Bowie with. The Crotch has its own fan page. I'm not sure if you call it the Crotch or the codpiece, but that's how popular it is nowadays. And I already mentioned the fact that it's this is one of fantasy movies in a long line of surprisingly dark fantasy movies from that era. And all it made it, the big thing I took from it was just the simple fact that I've not seen The Never-Ending Story. When I told that to one of my friends, like, you haven't seen Never-Ending Story, considering how many 80s films we've seen. And it's just like this complete blank spot. I don't know why at some point I decided I didn't want to watch it. And all I can think is that I didn't trust my friend's opinion, because if there's two films that my friends watch, which I didn't, because they had them on VHS, so it was Never-Ending Story and The People Under the Stairs. Okay. And they love those films. And for some odd reason, my brother and me, we've obviously decided, well, if they love them, they must be shit. We've just not watched them. I can't remember thinking that, but it must have been in the back of our head. Because
People Under the Stairs?
I've watched like half of it, but I watched it like 20 years later, but I never watched it growing up.
So I'm more surprised by The People Under the Stairs than I am Never-Ending Story. I've only seen Never-Ending Story once myself. Mm-hmm. But The People Under the Stairs, I think, is a fucking gem. It's so good.
Yeah, but that makes sense coming from you. But I feel like for kids growing up in the 80s, like, Never-Ending Story was a thing. It felt like it was a thing. I don't feel like, every kid saw People Under the Stairs. Everyone was like, oh yeah, everyone watched Wes Craven's People.
Well, they had a bad childhood then, didn't they?
They clearly did. They clearly did. But I feel like Never-Ending Story was just one of those films like most kids watched growing up, and it was just never. I mean, there were like fucking 4 sequels. Yeah, I think there was a bunch of them anyway.
There was 3, and I remember the one of them randomly had Jack Black as the bad guy.
Did it really?
Yeah.
I have no idea. I really should watch the original. I mean, we do a podcast about going back and revisiting 80s films. This might be the place to do it, but I'm not going to be the one who picks The Never-Ending Story. It's just not going to happen.
No, I think that's going to come from Darry, because I'm not sure I'll be picking it up.
Yeah, fair enough. In terms of score soundtrack, I mean, obviously, pretty famous one. Everyone remembers Magic Dance, but the single released to coincide with the movie was actually Underground. That was the song from the start of the film, the one that, the only reason I think is because, again, it sounds a bit like the main theme to Top Gun at the start. But of all the songs to pick from this film, they've gone with Underground, which I don't think has lived particularly long in the memory, certainly compared to Magic Dance. You already mentioned the fact that Toby didn't make enough in the way of gurgling noises during Magic Dance, so Bowie had to step in instead. 5 of the new songs Bowie recorded for the movie included the vocal talents of like such people as Luther Vandross, Shaka Khan, Robin Beck, who was a one-hit wonder performer of First Time, and Cissy Houston, who is the mother of Whitney Houston. So I wasn't aware that there were quite so many famous names on the soundtrack for this film. But yeah, it's not just Bowie, a whole bunch involved. And then we've mentioned a bunch of times, there is the Chili Down with the Fire Gang. The song makes no sense. I mean, the general gist of the song is take off your body parts so they can, quote, show you a good time. I don't know what the hell they're thinking in that film. But for the most part, the songs work in this film. Obviously, Magic Dance being the most famous of them. But yeah, Chili Down with the Fire Gang. I think that might live longest in the memory for me now, just because it's so goddamn disturbing. In terms of video games, Labyrinth was actually the first adventure game produced by Lucasfilm. It was one of those menu-based text adventures released in 1986 to coincide with the movie. They obviously became LucasArts and subsequently became one of the most critically acclaimed and commercially successful developers in the genre. There was they were never for me, but games like Monkey Island, Day of the Tentacle, and all that jazz, it all started with Labyrinth. I didn't even know there was a video game based on it, but yeah, that's where the whole Lucasfilm adventure genre started, supposedly. And in the States in particular, Labyrinth the game was actually more successful than the movie, which seems bizarre. I mean, again, I'd never even heard of this video game. I've never been like a PC gamer or a computer gamer, whatever you want to call them. And I've never necessarily been a big fan of like the LucasArts adventure games. But supposedly it started with Labyrinth. It was a big hit in the US, but I think that speaks more to the fact that the film wasn't a very big hit in the US. As to what I would want from a Labyrinth game in modern day, the first thing I thought of was, I'm not sure if you've played The Witness before.
No.
It's a first-person adventure game. It's created by Jonathan Blow. It's an amazingly constructed video game with very little story. It's kind of more along the lines of Myst. I'm not sure if you remember those video games. But if you could create that kind of world, but add a narrative and a bit of character, I think that would totally work. Or you could even have Braid. Braid is like a side-scroller, also created by Jonathan Blow. But the other one that jumped at me, and maybe I'm just doing like a throwback to, I'm not sure if you've ever seen the video game movie, Indie Game, the movie. There's like, you know, the early 2010s, there was a whole bunch of like really interesting indie developers like Jonathan Blow and Phil Fish who created Fez. Fez is a very different game, but if you kind of reskinned it, it's basically like a labyrinthine, if that's a word, platformer, where you can go into doors and you go deeper and deeper into the world. Like visually, it's absolutely amazing. Fez. It's a great game. Again, if you could add a bit of narrative to it and a bit more character, then I think it could work as a Labyrinth game. So that's what I'm going to go with, basically. I'm either going to go with The Witness or Fez, but just more labyrinthy.
Yeah, I mean, I would make it just an adventure. I don't have anyone in mind other than, you're going to hate me again, Naughty Dog kind of thing, because I'd make it like an adventure game, like just solving puzzles of the labyrinth moving forward.
Well, that's what I was thinking. It has to be more puzzle-based than action-based, I think.
Well, yeah, I mean, I suppose it's right, but I couldn't think of any. I mean, you're more of an indie gamer than I am. I mean, I am a gamer, but I've never played all these indie games and things like that.
Yeah,
so,
yeah. Well, I tell you what, they're a great shot. They've totally held up. Like the Jonathan Blow games, Braid and The Witness are both fantastic. And that's someone who's not necessarily into puzzle games. And Fez, again, because of the platform, it's easy to get into. The aesthetic would have totally held up. But it has that puzzle element in terms of you just keep going deeper and deeper into the world, and you kind of got to figure out this like 2D/3D maze of a world, and you can spin around. It's very clever anyway. So this is more of an advert just to say go out and play Fez, basically.
Oh, fair enough. No, so I'm not too sure. I'll have to go with you on this one because unless we just say Naughty Dog make this game, then I'm
I just think you really like Naughty Dog, which is fair enough.
Well,
they do make quite good games, I hear.
You know I do. You know I'm a Naughty Dog fan.
So in terms of scores and recommendations, I think this is going to be an interesting one. Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I don't think it's as bad as you would probably imagine, because I definitely recommend it. It's a fun film to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, it's a great film. It's really enjoyable. There's a lot of things that are just like, if you look at the subtexts, we've already said things like that. It's a fun.
Don't think too much about it. Yeah, that way.
Don't do what I did. But it's a fun watch, and it's really, and it's good, and it's catchy. The songs are catchy. You can quote the lines. Things. Yeah, it's definitely one I would recommend. But it's not one I would need to recommend to like, oh, I'd only recommend to this person or this person. It's across the board, and I'm really looking forward to having my son. I've said this previously. There's films I want my son to go back and watch with me. And this is definitely one of them. Like, I really want to see how he feels about that. I mean, we've met Dave a couple of times already today, but Dave did it with his daughter. I mean, she's a massive Bowie. She went as David Bowie for World Book Day. 1 month. So she's a massive Bowie fan. She's 8 years old, and she loves Labyrinth. And I really want to see how my kid would react to this film. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it. In regards to scores, you're gonna hate it, mate. It's not quite a 4, but it's not a 3. It's a 3.5. It's a really.
I think that's totally fair, and I largely agree with a lot of what you said. I guess I'd just be a bit more specific in regards to the recommendations, because I'm not sure if I'd necessarily recommend, say, any of my friends who grew up with it to go back and rewatch it. Part of me thinks it's like, maybe just leave it in the past. I was like, you're not going to hate it, but I don't think you're going to necessarily like it any more than you did. But in terms of like recommending it to, like you said, if you had never seen it before, or didn't know anything about it, I would recommend your kids watch it. And I think this would still totally hold up. You know, you mentioned that, Dave's daughter loves this film. I think a lot of kids would still love it. And like some of those issues that we have in this film are the kind of issues which just don't matter when you're a kid. And in terms of, again, its imagination, the fact that the visuals hold up, and like kids are going to totally latch onto all this stuff. So I would absolutely recommend that all my friends show this film to their kids, because I think they will absolutely adore it. As to recommending it to adults who had never seen it, I'm not sure. I kind of feel like you had to be there. So I'm not sure if I'm just going to randomly say to my 38-year-old friend, you have to watch Labyrinth if you didn't see it when you're younger. But if they have kids, I'm like, you should totally watch it with your kids. I know it's quite specific.
Oh, I see.
I'm going to give this a 4, but it's just about a 4, because again, I think the imagination, the visuals, David Bowie and Jennifer Connelly. I think it eventually wins out despite its flaws. However, 3.5 I think is absolutely reasonable. It just about makes a 4 for me, but I'm going to stick with it.
You can't do 3. You can't do halves.
Basically, what I'm saying is, it's a 3.5, but I really don't want to give it 3.5. It's like on an old school IGN rating system, it would be like a 3.8, basically. So I'm gonna round up to a 4. But yes, just about a 4. But if you were to say, oh, this is a 3-star film, I don't think that's egregious by any. It depends what you want to latch onto. But as specifically a kids film, I think it's definitely like a 4-star kids film.
No, I totally agree with you there. To be fair, that recommending it to parents for their kids to watch is the right shout. Absolutely. But yeah,
it's one of those weird ones though, because it depends on the remit. Are we ranking it by today's standards? Because I am ranking it by today's standards, but not by me. It's like I probably watched it and saw it as a 3-star film, but I can see, I'm like, oh, dude, if I had like kids, I'd be like, oh, you've got to watch this film. And I can imagine it's very much a 4-star kids film, but I probably enjoyed it to a 3-star level, if that makes sense, as a 40-year-old man. Oh, God, I'm actually 41, aren't I? Jesus Christ. Never mind. As a 41-year-old man. So, I'm gonna stick with 4 because that's what it's aimed for.
Yeah, I mean, 3.5, 4. I mean, we both pretty much agree.
Yeah. Well,
it still holds its magic, and it's still a really good film to watch. So, no, I totally agree with that. What do you think? Do you, the listener, do you agree with us? Is there something that we've missed? Please feel free to just let us know.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if a lot of people just kind of like, oh no, this is a 5-star film, if they feel that strongly about it. Or is that based on kind of rose-tinted glasses, their memories of this film? Like, have you watched this film recently? Again, it's on Netflix, it's ready to watch. And admittedly, I don't think I ever saw this as a 5-star film. I didn't think I was going to go back and go, oh, there's that 5. I remember loving this film growing up, but I don't think it was one of my favorite films. It's just a memorable one. And it was almost exactly what I expected a revisit to this film to be. Although, like I said, I was surprised. Initially, when I was going back to it, I was like, man, I can't remember much of this film. And then I watched it. I was like, oh, yeah, because none of it makes sense. It was absolutely fine. So, yeah.
Of all the films,
4 stars.
Of all the films we've covered, this one seems to hold the love of the masses more than any of the ones we've done. So
maybe more than most. Yeah, people feel very fucking strongly about this film. And I don't think I'd be interested in how many of them say, oh, this is a 5-star film. But I think it's more just the fact that it's a really likable film. It's not one of these kind of films where I think, oh, like the reviews would be all over the place. I think most people would generally agree 3.5, 4 stars is probably about right for this film. But I'd be quite confident that everyone would feel the same. I don't think many people are going to rewatch this film and go, oh no, Labyrinth was shit, because it's not, is it?
No.
But I think it's sitting in the right place where it's always been.
So that was Labyrinth anyway. Next week it's Liam's choice. So come on, mate, give us a hint.
Nuksu cow. Nuksu cow. Nuksu cow. Nuksu cow. What does it mean? It means white warrior. We're going back.
We are doing Kickboxer.
We are indeed doing Kickboxer. It was between Bloodsport and Kickboxer. I know a lot of people love Bloodsport, and for good reason. But when I grew up, Kickboxer was always my movie. Of the Jean-Claude Van Damme movies, that was always my favorite. So that's why we're going back and revisiting it. As to whether this is going to hold up, I'm not sure if everyone's going to agree that this is a 4-star film. I loved this movie back in the 80s. It's a very, very 80s movie, despite the fact that it was released at the tail end of the decade. God, I've not seen this film in a while. There's the dance sequence. There's the great showdown at the end of the film. Will it hold up? I don't know. And that's going to be
a little tale from young Rob, who had this on VHS. And apparently, from my mother telling me this, watched this film every Sunday for nearly 2 years.
Wowzers. Well, I mean, you loved it even more than I did. Jesus. And I saw this film a lot, but I saw this film a lot, but again, like a lot of these films, I've not seen it for a fair while.
Yeah, I mean, we're going into at least over 10, 15 years since I've seen this film.
Yeah, I think it's the same with me. So I can remember this film. Like I could probably play this film back to front in my head, but I don't know what that means as to the overall quality of it. That's the difference.
Cannot wait to tell you about Kickboxer 2, Kickboxer 3, Kickboxer 4, Kickboxer 5.
And it will not surprise you to hear that, despite the fact that I love this film, I've not seen any of those fucking movies. So yes, I look forward to that. I mean, that's going to be 45 minutes of the podcast. It's just going through you'll have to have legacy section next week, 100%. It's all yours, sir.
Because I've seen them all, mate.
Of course. Yeah, well, that's the thing. Legacy has been moved from me to you for next week, so you can go through all of the crummy sequels that released this film. But yes, this has been Labyrinth. Next week, Kickboxer, obviously. Why wouldn't we jump from Labyrinth to Kickboxer? But thanks as always for listening, and please do join us again next week.
If she'd have kept going, fuck you. Right, I'm just going to...
You're not doing a Bowie impression, Rob?
Fuck no. I can barely do this impression. Hang on, let's leave it.
Oh, and before we forget, here is Rob with all the finer details. Got to get through those, dude.
Yeah, so basically you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at HeyYouGuys80s. We're also on email at HeyYouGuys80s@gmail.com. Please feel free to drop us any recommendations, any corrections or omissions we may have missed from any of the films that we've covered. Just get them in. And also, if you could, please leave us some 5-star reviews. That would really help us. And we'd like to thank, as always, Darry Fletcher at Darry Doodles for the fantastic artwork that we're now producing. Thanks for that, mate.
Cheers, Darry.
Yeah. And thanks again for listening, and we will see you next week.
Cheers. Bye.
Hey, you